Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk to you right now about assessing and evaluating students. So I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and we respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. So the talk that I'm about to give today starts with it directly impacts demonstrating a professional body of knowledge, which goes to teacher quality standard number 3. And this is that a teacher applies a current and comprehensive repertoire of effective planning, instruction, and assessment practices to meet the learning needs of every student. So every teacher needs to think about assessment, and assessment is an essential part of knowing that a student has achieved what they have set out to do. And so this talk also will indirectly cover teacher quality standard number 1, which is about creating positive and effective relationships with students. So without further ado, onwards we go. The agenda for today is to talk about assessment for, as, and of learning, to talk about the difference between assessment and evaluation, and further that with some discussion about test anxiety, which is something that I have noticed over the past few years has become much more common for students and something that we need to be aware of in the classroom. So to begin, we used to formally talk about diagnostic assessment and summative assessment. And those were the two things that teachers really needed to look at. They used diagnostic kind of as if there was a problem with the student, we had to try and figure out what was going on with that particular student. And then at the end, we use summative assessment to think about what it is. Did they cover, did they learn the things that we set out to teach them? So our thinking has morphed kind of from those old terms, and we've moved on to something new, and we talk about assessment for learning, as learning, and of learning. So these thinking about these three terms for thinking about assessment, um, we they've changed kind of the focus of how we do things in the classroom. So assessment for learning is something that every teacher should do before they start kind of a major unit or new major concepts. And why would we assess for learning? Well, we're trying to see two basic things. So before we begin teaching students something, we need to know that it is developmentally appropriate for them to learn. So, for example, if I have students who are in grade 10 math and I'm trying to teach them trigonometry and they haven't mastered multiplication yet, they're not going to be able to do that no matter how hard I try to teach it, simply because they're not developmentally ready. So I have to make sure that my students are actually capable of learning the thing that I'm setting out to teach. So that's a key concept for teachers. Are my students able to learn the thing that I need them to learn? The second thing I need to do is, do my students already know the thing that I have set out to teach them? So if I'm trying to teach my students multiplication and they already know how to do multiplication, I'm wasting my time and I'm wasting their time. And time is something precious. So our job is to move students along the pathway of their development. But they can't do it if what I'm setting out to teach them is too difficult, and they can't do it if they already know how to do it. So my job as a teacher before I start to teach them anything is to know that they're ready and in a good position to learn that concept. So that's assessment for learning. Now, as a teacher, if I'm worth my weight, I am always assessing my students. Every moment of every lesson of every day, I'm assessing students. I'm not necessarily doing it formally, but I'm always paying attention to what they're learning. So as my students are working in class, I'm walking around and I'm noticing, are these students grasping the concepts that I need them to grasp? Are they struggling? Is this piece of the lesson really difficult? Am I aware that, sorry about that. Am I aware that this is too difficult for them to do? So I'm constantly trying to pay attention to this for students. So if I'm assessing as learning, I'm trying to think, how do I help my students set goals? I'm thinking about, how do they monitor their progress? Do they know if they're getting the material or not? And how do I monitor their progress to know if they're getting the material or not? I'm also looking for the next steps. So if I'm teaching a lesson, they're not grasping the concepts, I have to constantly be thinking, what should I do? Should I go back and reteach this? Should I just move forward and hope they get it? And then at the end, I'm helping my students to reflect, did they do a good job or not? Because ultimately, they're the ones who have to make that decision. But I'm also reflecting on my teaching. So to some, and then after, as the lesson is progressing and through all of this, I have to have an assessment of learning. I need to know that they actually learned the thing that I set out to teach them. So again, assessment happens throughout the whole learning process. We start off to make sure they're developmentally ready and able to learn. That's assessment for learning. I'm assessing them while they're learning, and I'm paying attention to what they know and helping them grow as students. So that's assessment as learning. And at the end of it, I'm making a kind of a judgment call to see if they've learned the things that I've taught them, and that's assessment of learning. And so all three of these are important components in what we do as teachers. Here, if I'm thinking about this, one of the key concepts for the difference between assessment for, as, and of learning, how do they differ? I need to point out that they don't differ in the tools that I use, but they differ in the purpose for which I use those tools. So I could have a quiz to see if they know the basic things for that topic and that they know that topic. I've used a quiz as an assessment for learning. I know that they're developmentally ready, and I know that they don't know that information. So that quiz is used as an assessment for learning. I could use that exact same quiz throughout my unit to see, are they getting the information that I need them to get? Are they paying attention? Do they have those basic concepts? Are they moving along a trajectory? So then that quiz becomes an assessment as learning. And then at the very end, I could use that quiz and to see that they actually got all of the information that I set out to teach them. I can use that as an assessment of learning. So it's not so much the fact that it's a quiz. A quiz means an assessment of learning. It's an, this tool, I'm using it kind of in the beginning to see where I'm going. I'm using it while I'm teaching to see that we're going in the direction we're supposed to go, or I use it at the end to make sure they've done, that we've reached our final destination. So this is a really important concept. So the difference in assessment between as, of, and for learning is not so much the tool as it is the purpose for which I use it. As a teacher, we're always looking for triangulation. So if I have a triangle and I draw a line through the triangle and I draw another line through the triangle and I draw a line down, I kind of converge in the middle, right? If I'm drawing a line through the whole thing, I want to see that the students have mastered what it is that I need them to know. And so I'm always looking for evidence that they're mastering what it is I'm doing. And we call this kind of mastering triangulation. Since I can't really open up somebody's head and peer inside to make sure they've studied what it is that they're supposed to do, and those synapses are formed in their brain, I have to look for external evidence of that. And so I'm looking for three forms of evidence for every student to make sure they've mastered the concepts. So part of this is conversations with the students. I'm talking with them, and while I'm talking with them, I can ask them, do you know? How do you know this piece of information? We're doing procedural writing. How do I know you know what procedural writing is? If I ask them and they tell me, then I know they know what procedural writing is. Another thing that I need to know, I could use to find out if they know what procedural writing is I could have products. So I could ask my students, actually write me a procedure. give me the 10 steps you need to know in order to build a snowman. So they can show me an actual piece of writing that demonstrates what it is that they know. So I've talked with them. I have some kind of product that they've done. And the third thing I can do is I can observe my students in process. And from there, I'm noting, can they do it by themselves? Do they need support? What kind of supports do they need? Do they need me to write all of the words on the board for them? Can they do it all independently? And I'm paying attention to all of those things. If I have conversations, products, and observations with my students, and they can do those in each of the steps, I know that they have mastered the concept I've set up to teach them. So when I look for assessment of learning as learning and for learning, I can use all of these tools to support me with triangulation. I can use a quiz, an assignment, a portfolio, a reflection, a pre and post test, a photo, a question, a journal, a note. All of these things will prove to my students or prove to me that my students have mastered or are in the process of mastering the concepts that I'm trying to teach. So again, it's really important. The tools are not what differs. It's, well, you would use different tools, but you would use these tools for certain purposes. And with these tools, you are looking for triangulation to prove that students can do conversations, products, and observations. So there is a big difference between an assessment and an evaluation. So an assessment is for you kind of as a teacher or for the student to see where they are in relation to their learning. But an evaluation is an end sum game. We have to have some kind of formal evaluation so that we know exactly where the students are in their learning. Now, um, in this class, we do tons of assessments. Every week, I will give a lecture, and in the lecture, I will give assignments. All of those assignments are to prove to me that you are moving forward along that trajectory. Those are all assessments as learning. There are two major assignments in this class, and those are assessments of learning. I'm looking at all of those things to try and make sure that you know all of the things that you need to know. Now, in terms of assessment for learning, there are certain things that I know you have some of that knowledge already. Number one, there's prerequisites to get into this course. Let me just go back here. Um, if I go into this, sorry, I'll restart. If I look at an assessment for learning, I know that you have the developmental readiness to learn what I'm about to teach you because you have the prerequisites. I also have experience in teaching you, and in the experience teaching you, I know that you most likely don't know those things. But at the start of a talk, if I'm doing this talk online with you, I'll ask you questions and I'll be aware of whether or not you know this information. I'm pretty sure through experience, I know diagnostically where you are, but that's what I'm doing when I ask, do you know what this is? I'm starting off right from the top with an assessment for learning. As we go through the lesson, I'll do the recording, I'll talk about that with you, and then I give you some assignments. When I give you those assignments, they're assessments as learning. So you're aware of what it is that you're supposed to be learning. I'm aware that you're actually getting those concepts. And then at the end, there's some assessments that are happening all the way along. I've given you one, you've just handed it in to me, where you are looking at the students' benchmarks and you are using those to determine where the student is in their learning. And that's an assessment of learning. You'll be doing the same thing with lesson planning. That's an assessment of learning. Your final exam will also be an assessment of learning. At the end of all of this, I have to give you a grade, whether or not I like it, and I don't. But that's what I need to do. Is I need to give you a formal grade, and so an evaluation is high stakes, and it counts for something. So, and it's also a form of ranking people amongst each other. When I do assessments, I'm ranking you against yourself. You're ranking you against yourself. But when I do an evaluation, I'm ranking you against your peers. Um, I don't like it, but this is the world we live in, and this is what we have to do. And we often need evaluations for qualifications to prove that people have the minimum standard of what it is that they need to do. These are often things like formalized tests, their grades, their proof for qualification, and they might be a score for the Common European Framework of Reference or something like that to prove that you have the skills that you need in order to move forward. Our benchmark, depending on how you want to look at it, for me is more of an assessment than an evaluation because the stakes are not really tied to anything. It's just kind of a personal continuum of where you are and where you're moving. Whereas a final grade in social studies would be an evaluation because that's going to determine the next class that you can move on to. Okay. So, a little note about test anxiety. That's something that's becoming more and more common. And so I just took this from Wikipedia. It's not fancy, but there are physiological signs. So, do you notice when you're teaching a class, if you have students who right before a test have a stomach ache, they have diarrhea, they're sweating, they feel difficulty breathing, and sometimes they might pass out? I've had this happen, not often, but it has happened. So people will have physiological signs that they're suffering, excuse me, from the stress of having a test. Students will often feel worry and dread. So I feel like I'm a total failure. This is going to go badly. My friend is smarter than I am. I'm not really good. It's test anxiety. There are also cognitive and behavioral signs. Like a student in the middle of a test, they'll be fidgeting with their pencil. They'll be like, I'm totally blank. I'm totally blank. I can't remember what that is. Sometimes they'll be fidgeting around. And all of these things can also have emotional consequences. Students might have low self-esteem and depression as a result of test anxiety. So these are pretty serious things, and they can have serious consequences for somebody's mental health and mental well-being. So I'd like to point out that as a teacher, you are not qualified to diagnose anyone with a medical or a psychological condition. And I see this happening all the time, and it's something that upsets me when I see my coworkers do this. You do not have the right as a teacher to tell a parent that their child has ADHD unless you have gone to medical school and you are a registered psychologist. It is not your job. You are not capable of diagnosing dyslexia. Um, you're also not capable of diagnosing test anxiety or anxiety in general. This is not your purview. However, if you see the signs of these things, as a human being, you have, and especially as a professional, you have the responsibility of helping people work through things. And if people have diagnoses, you have the responsibility of helping them work through those things. So, um, if you're a student and you have test anxiety, there are things that you can do to help alleviate your test anxiety. You can eat healthy because the healthier you are in your body, the better you have, the better chances you have of recovering from this anxiety. You can try to sleep enough. You can study a lot and you can over practice. It's easier for you to learn more the more you have practiced. If you study for every night for a month, it's much better than studying all day, every day for 2 days before the test. So you can over rehearse, you make sure that you know everything. You can practice positive visualization. You can sit at your house and before you go to sleep, you've studied for your test, you know it's coming up. You lie in your bed and you picture yourself in the room getting the test in front of you, and everything you just know how to do, you get it right. You have this positive belief that it's going to go well. And then you can practice relaxation or meditation. Those are all things that you can do that will help you to do well on a test. Now, If you were a teacher, what can you do? How do you manage things for somebody else? And so some would say that you can't, but I would argue differently. So if you are a teacher and you have students with test anxiety, what do you do? Now, the number one thing is to recognize that it exists. Again, not diagnose, but recognize that some students might feel anxious. And so if you have students that feel anxious, you can go out of your way to support these students to make sure that they're in the best possible frame of mind to be successful. So, number one is make the test format familiar. I do this with my students on a regular basis. I have a student with test anxiety, and even in a very young age, she has test anxiety. We do spelling tests, and she completely blanks out. So, one of the things I do is we practice every single day. We'll do a spelling test. The only one that counts is the one that's on Friday. So she's so familiar with the test format. She's not panicking about what's coming next. I don't know what I'm going to need to know how to do. So she can just relax and show me what she knows. The next thing you can do is tell people specifically what it is they need to know. So I don't understand why this is a thing, but there's plenty of people who give students a test and they'll say, "What do I need to know?" And the teacher will say, "You need to know everything that we've covered." That's not helpful. So you can plan it out with students. Have students draw mind maps of all of the concepts. Give them some specific study skills and tell them specifically what content it is that they need to master. You can teach students breathing techniques. So before you get in, you can see people are nervous. You can pull them aside and say, "Let's breathe. We'll practice doing some regulatory breathing so that they get ready for that." You can have students build success. So, like my student that has test anxiety, I pull her aside at the end of every test, and I point out to her, "Look, we had 6 words on the spelling test. You managed to get every single one right. You tell me you don't know how to do tests and that they scare you, but I'm telling you, every time you've done a test in my class, you've done well." So I'm building up her positive self-belief and self-efficacy so that she can be successful. Teach skill deficits. Again, if I know my students are going to be doing three-digit multiplication and they don't know their times tables, then they're not going to be able to do multiplication. So I make sure that I learn those underlying skills, and those underlying skills that I have are going to help students be successful. Um, Again, teach study skills. How do you teach people how to practice? Teach them how to look for the patterns in the information. Teach them the vocabulary that they need. Give them the steps that they need to practice. Again, systematic desensitization. Like I told you with my student, we practice spelling tests every single day. And once we get past the spelling tests, we'll be able to move on to quizzes because she's already learning that she can go and she can do things. Um, Again, avoid making high stakes tests if you have to. Why do you have to give students one big end of the unit quiz or one big end of the unit test when you can give 10 small quizzes? So if you have 10 small quizzes and you make a mistake on one, then you have a better chance to recover than if you have one day with a big test. Um, some teachers will offer chances for makeup. So if you do poorly on a test, you can go back and do it another day. And this is my number one thing. Ask yourself if you need to give a test or another sort of evaluation or assessment will do. Do you really need to give your students a test if you can call in their homework 5 times? If you call in their homework 5 times, they have done that work. And then is it as effective if you need to give a test? In my class, you'll notice that there are university professors who are asking you to do a test, and they've got all kinds of online tools so that you don't cheat. I don't believe in I don't believe in that. I'm asking myself, is it better to give you a take-home test that's going to be a lot more intensive, and you'll have a short amount of time to do it, but you've got all of your tools available at your disposal. To me, this is much more symbolic of the real life task you'll be asked to do. If you don't know something, you have the opportunity to go find it out. And that's what a skilled and dedicated professional would do. So having something memorized and stuck in your head for 3 hours while you are intensely focusing on a computer is not nearly as realistic as the real world task of teaching as it is giving you 3 days to get something done. And so that's why I've done the tests that I've done. So again, if I were to sum this all up and you were to think about how I use this class to help manage test anxiety, I'm looking at all of these things for you. I'm giving you, I might not be giving you the questions for your final exam, right? But I'm giving you the test format. So you'll know that it's a take home exam. You'll be able to look at your notes and figure things out for yourself. Um, you'll be able to give yourself the chance to be successful. Hopefully, you've got all kinds of assignments that you can go back and look at, and you'll be able to take some information from those if you've been looking at my feedback. Um, so all of these things are to build up desensitization for you so that you'll be able to be successful. So there is my talk for you right now, and I look forward to seeing you guys later.